Welcome to this episode of Daily Debrief, coming to you from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. First up, in his first public remarks in Canada, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, Pope Francis, has asked Indigenous residential school survivors for their forgiveness. The Pope was speaking on the grounds of a former residential school near Edmonton, and there were several survivors in the audience, many of whom had travelled to hear him speak. He's in Canada specifically to address the role of his church in the abuses committed at these schools, which were meant to assimilate Indigenous children and were used as a part of government policy to destroy Indigenous culture. He also added that the apology is just the first step and there needs to be a serious investigation into the systematic abuses perpetrated at these schools. For more on this story, I spoke earlier to Anish of People's Dispatch. Anish, obviously hearing an apology, an unconditional apology from the Pope is a major thing in the context of the Canadian residential schools system. What exactly, in terms of the historical significance of this statement, as well as the reactions to it, are you seeing?
So, a little bit of the history on this, what were called as Indian schools, or Indian residential schools, is that it was a forced assimilation policy. It was, which was eventually, and today, very rightly so, is treated as a cultural genocide being inflicted on the Indigenous peoples of Canada. Close to a third of Indigenous children between 1887 to 1960 were put through the school system. About 150,000 children have had to go through this. And very often it's schools were posted somewhere very far away from their homes. They were forcibly taken away from their family. So it's a legacy that still haunts the current, even to this day, people, there are survivors who have been through those school systems. So it is not something, it's some kind of ancient history or like something that happened centuries ago. It is something that happened just like 2 generations ago. So this definitely has an impact, and there is a great deal of symbolic value, and I have to insist and emphasize on this symbolic part of it.
Symbolic part of
But
it.
there is definitely a symbolic value when the Pope actually used the word sorry in stating his apology, because the Vatican has expressed deep sorrow and stuff like that more than a decade ago, and have obviously had shown some level of remorse. But this sort of outright statement of an apology by the Pope himself is quite historic to begin with.
Right. And what happens now, Anish? Where do we go from here? We've seen this issue in the press for in a sustained way for several months now, if not longer. What next? Do we see concrete steps? Are some efforts between the government and the church going to be made towards reparations towards those who have suffered and even the survivors that may exist at this point?
I think we have to differentiate between an apology and reparations. Both are very two different things, obviously. And the reason why I emphasized on the symbolic part of the apology is the fact that reparations are nowhere in the horizon right now. There is no mention of it either from the church, the Pope, or the government. So we are looking at a situation where obviously symbolic gestures are being made. But there is very little being done in actually moving forward towards a real reconciliation with the Indigenous people and to face the colonial history that Canada has. And it's not just history, its very nature is colonial. We're still talking about a nation set up on stolen land, right? So there is, if you look at some of the hard facts, obviously no reparations have been made. Even to this day, we do not know how many children died in these schools. The estimates of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission said something about 6,000, and that is still a conservative estimate if you consider the fact that only with handful of schools we have discovered more than 1,000 graves already, and these were unmarked graves. There were no records of it. So these are something being uncovered right now. Obviously, there are other, all the schools are going through, or at least most of the schools are going through some level of attempt to discover these graves, and quantify the number of people dead. And it's not just dead. We are also talking about the larger cultural genocide that has been inflicted. Languages have gone extinct. So there are a whole host of things that were recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015 in their report when they gave that indemnifying report to the government. And to this day, the estimates show that anywhere between 8 to 12 recommendations have only been fully completed of the more than 90 recommendations. And most of these are of symbolic value.
Yeah.
So we really need to talk about the fact that the real material attempt at reparations and reconciliations are still being avoided by the government and
Mm.
by the Catholic Church and also other churches that ran these schools. We have to remember most of them were run by some or the other kind of congregation, be it Anglican, Presbyterian. Even
Mm.
though the Catholic Church held up to 67% of them, there were others also involved.
Right.
So we are not even hearing any kind of apology from those sides to begin with.
Mm.
So it's
Mm.
still a very long way to go for the indigenous peoples,
Mm.
and many of them have actually shown some level of disappointment in the sense that they are happy with the apology, the fact that there has been attempts to make an apology, but they want real changes to happen right now. And the legacy of it, I have to add this, and after that I'll log out, but it has to be emphasized that the legacy of that presidential school still continues. To this day, more than half of the foster care children in the foster care system are indigenous people, indigenous
Right.
children.
Mm.
And that is despite the fact that they're barely 7% of the national population.
Population.
So you're looking at a system, even though it may not be as egregious or violent as it used to be, but
Mm.
there is still a system that is separating parents from their children, especially indigenous children.
Mm.
So this is something that Canada really needs to face up and not just present itself as some kind of goody two shoes country in the West.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Anish. And of course, the Pope Francis also mentioning a serious investigation. So we'll wait and see how that proceeds. Next up, violence between rival armed groups in the Syrian cities of Tripoli and Misrata has left at least 17 dead over the last week, many of whom are civilians. The situation has been described by the United Nations Assistant Secretary General Martha Poby in an update to the United Nations Security Council as highly volatile, with a tense security situation, deeply disturbing shows of force and sporadic violence by militias engaged in political maneuvering. The constitutional and political crisis in the country has sparked increasing clashes, a dire economic situation, and demonstrations across the country by frustrated citizens. PB also cited a dispute over the leadership of the National Oil Corporation and serious human rights concerns, including the reported arrest by armed groups of dozens of protesters who took part in the July 1st demonstrations decrying deteriorating living conditions and demanding progress towards elections. Meanwhile, reports indicate that Libyan crude oil production has gone up to 860,000 barrels per day, up from around 5,500,000 barrels earlier this month, even though disruptions continue. Abdul is in studio now to talk more about what's going on in Libya. Abdul, first up, what are the latest updates, at least in terms of the violence that's ongoing?
Well, on Thursday and Friday, there were a series of such incidents. Of course, the Tripoli one was the largest, in which 17 people were killed, more than 50 were injured. But there were other incidents in and around that period in Misrata, in other parts of the country, in which it is quite obvious that the factions, different factions which had agreed for a ceasefire in October 2020, are not very happy with that condition, primarily because of the rivalry related to who will have what kind of share in the power. We know that there is a government established after that UN-led process in February 2021. It failed to conduct the elections, and since then there is a kind of some kind of lack of confidence in its ability to move the country from towards a lasting peace. So that unrest is also reflected by the people, as you rightly pointed out, how people are not happy with basically not having elections and not seeing any prospect of a lasting peace the war is already a decade old. And of course, it has started affecting even the middle classes in the cities, the major cities in Tripoli, in Misrata, in Sirte, in other parts of the country. Even the middle classes who were by and large not that affected with the war now are feeling the impact of it, primarily because of the war and the different violations of ceasefire in last few days, leading to the disruption in the oil production, which is the main source of national income. So all these things are leading to, it looks like that it leading towards further unrest in the country. And therefore the UN intervention and the intervention of all those countries who have been supporting different factions in different ways in the country became very imminent. And that's why in that context the UN meeting was held yesterday. And I hope, we are all hoping that there is some possibility of a lasting peace in the country.
All right. And how does, we're talking about political maneuvering by various groups who are involved in the process. How does the National Oil Corporation fit into all of this from a political sort of context?
Yeah, that is a very important aspect of the Libyan context, I would say. If we see the controversy surrounding the appointment, the dismissal of the existing head of the National Oil Corporation and appointment of a new person, both of that incident basically shows how deep the Libyan conflict is rooted in and around the politics of oil. If we are not going into the history of why NATO intervened in Libya at the first place, which also had oil into it, but if we just see what happened earlier this month when the Beba appointed a new head of the oil corporation, it is said that the new head of the oil corporation is basically a man closer to Khalifa Haftar. And so far, Khalifa Haftar has been a rival, the fiercest rival to the Beba and the government in Tripoli. It means there is some kind of compromise. There are speculation in local press in Libya also that there is some kind of understanding going on between Khalifa Haftar and the Beba. That should ideally make all the people who are watching Libyan conflict happy, because
more
that,
hopeful at least.
Yeah, exactly, that this can lead to peace. But the complexity is so that those forces who are loyal to Khalifa Haftar might revolt against his attempts to kind of find peace with the Beba. So that basically is creating the complexities at this particular moment. As you rightly pointed out, the oil production, which were blocked by the Khalifa Haftar forces in May and April-May, has now resumed. That means that the government in Libya will have enough resources now to kind of help the people find basic services, basic amenities and all. That may address some of the issues, but it may make the other sections of this complex war unhappy. And that is a problem which UN-led peace process becomes very important. Right now, for last few months, that peace process is by and large not moving forward, and that is that basically, even if there are possibilities of patching up between Khalifa Haftar and the Beba, may not until there is a broader peace process resuming, in which all the parties are involved. This may not be good for the Libya.
All right. Thanks very much for that update on a complex situation, Abdul. Thank you very much for watching. As always, you can head over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for updates on all of those stories, plus a lot more. And give us a follow on whatever social media platform you choose to use. We'll be back again, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.